Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in today's video, I just want to respond to a question that I got, and I get a variation of the same question. It comes up pretty often, so I think this is a good thing to make a video about. So let me first read the question to you, and then I'm going to give you my short answer, followed by my longer answer. All right, so the question is, could you not just learn these three positions, or do you need to learn all of the pentatonic boxes? Wouldn't you be playing the pentatonic and the diatonic scale with this three-pattern approach? And the answer to that question is yes. If you learn how to cover the fretboard to play the key scale, otherwise known as the diatonic scale, which also has like 10 different names, all of which I'm going to explain to you in this video. We're just going to call it the diatonic scale, which contains 7 notes. If you remove 2 of those notes, you're left with 5 notes, and that's going to be your pentatonic scale. So this person is basically saying, well, if I learn this 7-note diatonic scale and I learn how to cover the fretboard for that 7-note diatonic scale, then why should I have to learn the pentatonic scale separately? Because it's 5/7 of what I've already learned. And the answer is because they sound different. If you just limit your playing to 5 pentatonic notes, it's going to have a specific sound to it. I personally describe that sound as rock. You may have a different explanation or a different description of how that sound sounds to you. But in my brain, I'm like, that sounds rock. When you go ahead and you add in those 2 other notes to create the full 7 diatonic scale, and you use all 7 notes as your soloing framework, the sound produced is different than if you just play the pentatonic scale. I describe the sound of using the full 7-note diatonic scale as melodic. So if I limit my playing to just the 5 pentatonic notes, then it sounds rock. If I include all 7 notes and I utilize the full 7-note diatonic scale and I use that as my soloing framework, then it sounds melodic. That's just my descriptions of how I hear things. It doesn't matter how you describe the pentatonic sound versus the diatonic sound. The main thing to understand is that they sound different. And that's what I was trying to get across in the demo in the beginning. In the demo in the beginning, I was like, okay, this is what it sounds like if I just play the 5-note pentatonic scale. Now this is what it sounds like if I use the full 7-note diatonic scale. Hear the difference? That was the purpose of that demo. And that is why you should learn the pentatonic scale and the diatonic scale separately. So that's my short answer. So let's get into the long answer now. So the question that this person was asking was referring to the 3-pattern approach that I teach. So when it comes to covering the fretboard using the 7-note diatonic scale for whatever key you happen to be playing in, you can cover the entire fretboard using just 3 patterns. You can also use 5 patterns if you want. You can also use 7 patterns if you want. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, and I teach all of the different ways, and I have videos about all of the different ways as well. It's just that the 3-pattern approach is my personal favorite way. It involves the least amount of pattern memorization because you only have to remember 3 patterns as opposed to 5 or 7 patterns. And just for a little bit more explanation of what I'm talking about here, let's say that you're trying to jam with a band that's playing music that is in the key of C major. The rhythm section is in the key of C major. So the scale that you as the lead guitar player would use would be the C major scale. That would be your soloing framework to solo with and to jam over top of the music that is being played by the rhythm section that is in the key of C major. Rhythm section in C major, you lead guitar player play the C major scale. All right, makes sense, right? So if you want to cover the entire fretboard using the 7 notes of the C major scale, also known as the 7 notes of the diatonic scale in the key of C major, there's a couple different ways that you could say the same thing. You can do that using just 3 patterns. So the person's saying, hey, if I learn the C major scale over the entire fretboard and I have the 3 patterns that cover the entire fretboard, doesn't that also cover me for the C major pentatonic scale? 5 notes. The C major pentatonic scale is 5 notes. I already learned the C major scale, which is 7 notes. Doesn't that mean I also learned the C major pentatonic scale as well? Yes and no. So yes, because yeah, you've already learned 7, you learned the whole key scale, you learned all 7 notes. But I say no because do you have the ability to differentiate which notes are the 5 pentatonic notes and which notes are those 2 extra notes? Can you do that? Can you on command at any point in time say, I'm just going to play the 5 pentatonic notes, and then anytime you want, switch it and say, oop, I want to play those 2 extra notes now? If you can't do that, then no, you didn't learn the C major pentatonic scale. So the way that I teach it is I teach people to learn the pentatonic scale first, and then later on learn the full 7-note diatonic scale. The way that I personally learned it was backwards. I talked about this in my video where I talked about how I actually learned the fretboard versus the way that I teach things. So the way I learned it was I learned the diatonic scale first, And then later on, I came to realize, like, hey, I can't just reduce my playing to the pentatonic scale at will. I can play the diatonic scale really well. I know I can solo up and down the fretboard, using the full 7-note diatonic scale. But if I just want to play the pentatonic scale, I can't do that. So I had to go and I had to practice that separately. So I learned the diatonic scale first, and then I went and I learned the pentatonic scale second. I teach people to do it backwards. It doesn't really matter which order you do it in, but I do recommend that you do learn both separately. This gets confusing to people because there's a bunch of different names for this stuff. So the pentatonic scale is also referred to as the minor pentatonic scale. It's also referred to as the major pentatonic scale. It's the same pattern on the fretboard. It's the same. If you learn the 5 pentatonic boxes, that will cover you for the minor pentatonic scale. That will also cover you for the major pentatonic scale. The difference is, it all comes down to what the chord progression is doing, what the rhythm section is doing. If the rhythm section is playing something that puts you into the key of C major, and you use the pentatonic scale to solo over top of that, then you're using the C major pentatonic scale. If the rhythm section is playing something that puts the music into the key of A minor, and then you use the exact same set of notes, the exact same framework, the exact same patterns, the exact same set of 5 notes, well, now you're using the A minor pentatonic scale because the music is playing A minor stuff. So in both of those examples, you're using the pentatonic scale. You've identified the key, which has been determined based on what the rhythm section is playing. You say, oh, I got my key, let me play the pentatonic scale now. You got your 5 pentatonic boxes, you noodle around those 5 pentatonic boxes. It's just the pentatonic scale, but it has 2 different names. So right there, people are like, oh, major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, oh, these 2 different things I have to learn, blah, blah. And yes, for you music theory enthusiasts, it comes down to intervals. The minor pentatonic scale, the A minor pentatonic scale, in which the root note is A, you're calling A your 1. The other 5 notes in relation to A would have the interval makeup of 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. But if it's the C major pentatonic scale, the rhythm section has dictated that you're now playing in the key of C major and you're using the same soloing framework, the same 5 notes, the same patterns. But now it's the context of C major, so C is your 1. The other 5 notes in relation to the 1 are going to be 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. So the reason that the minor pentatonic scale has a different sound than the major pentatonic scale is because of the intervals. That's the under the hood stuff. But just looking at it from which 5 notes are we using or which patterns are we using on the fretboard, identical. A minor pentatonic, C major pentatonic, same 5 notes, same patterns. Everything about it is exactly the same. They sound different because the intervals are different. Now, the diatonic scale has like 10 different names, and this is where things get really crazy confusing. The diatonic scale is also known as the key scale. It's also known as the major scale. It's also known as the natural minor scale. You can also call it by any one of its 7 modal scale names. It's also the Ionian scale, the Dorian scale, the Phrygian scale, the Lydian scale, the Mixolydian scale, the Aeolian scale, and the Locrian scale. So all of these different names are just the diatonic scale. So again, if the rhythm section is playing something that's in the key of C major, then I say, okay, I'm going to play the diatonic scale for the key of C major. I could equivalently say that I'm going to play the C major scale, and that's going to be my soloing framework that I use to solo along with the band that is playing something in the key of C major. Or if the band decides to switch things up, they still continue to use the same pool of chords and the same pool of notes that they were previously using for the music that they were playing that was in the key of C major, but now they kind of switch it up and they make it sound a little sadder. Now their home chord or their tonal center they decide is going to be the A minor chord. They're still using the same handful of chords and whatnot, but now they're just playing in the key of A minor. Again, you're going to say, oh, okay, now you're in the key of A minor. All right, so my soloing framework is now going to be the diatonic scale for the key of A minor. Another name for this would be the A natural minor scale. It's the same patterns. It's the same 7 notes as what you just played for C major. It's just now we're calling it the A natural minor scale. Again, the intervals of the major scale are going to be different than the intervals of the minor scale because it depends on which note you're calling the 1. Depending on which note you call the 1, you then have to number the rest of the notes in accordance to that. So the scale formula for the major scale is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the interval makeup of the major scale. The scale formula for the natural minor scale is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. That's the interval makeup for the natural minor scale. So ignoring the intervals, which is the under the hood stuff, which is what makes the major scale sound different from the natural minor scale, that's the under the hood stuff. Ignoring that, you're just left with your 7 notes, which form these patterns. And the patterns in the 7 notes are exactly the same for C major or for A minor. So again, you have these 2 different names that you're dealing with, the major scale or the natural minor scale, or the key of C major or the key of A minor. It's just the diatonic scale. And then to add to the confusion even more, you then have all of this modes business. Guitar players love to talk about modes constantly. They love to obsess over modes. Modes, right? I typically tell people, like, if you're asking a question like, what's the difference between pentatonic and diatonic? If you're asking that kind of question, I'm going to have to assume that you probably shouldn't worry about modes yet. Modes is simultaneously very, very simple, yet simultaneously very, very confusing, because not only do people explain it in about 600 different ways, it's just one of those things, like, after you fully come around to understand this whole modes, the great and wonderful mysterious modes thing, you come to realize, like, that's it? Like, what was the big deal? And that's what I've been saying all along, you know? So yeah, so the rhythm section of the demo that I played in the beginning was A minor to G major to F major. It's the same rhythm section that was used in the Stairway to Heaven solo. I just used power chords. You could play full major and minor chords because each power chord is representative of a major chord or a minor chord for the key that you're playing in. So you're in the key of A minor. It's the relative minor of the key of C major. Your grouping of 6 on the circle of fifths gives you your major and minor chords found in that key. So the A power chord is representative of an A minor chord. The G power chord is representative of a G major chord. The F power chord is representative of an F major chord. It's those 3 chords, A minor, G major, F major. So yeah, so that's just the key of A minor, which is the relative minor of the key of C major, meaning that it shares the same notes and the same patterns as that of the key of C major. So therefore, I would just use the diatonic scale if I wanted to play all 7 notes, or I would just use the 5-note pentatonic scale if I just wanted to play the pentatonic scale and produce that rockin' type of sound. So that's the easiest way to express what I'm doing there. If you want to kind of dial it up a notch and use different wording that's slightly more complicated, you would say, okay, you're playing in the key of A minor. All right, the scale that I'm going to be using to solo over the entire chord progression that you're playing there is going to be the A natural minor scale. That's slightly more complicated than just calling it the diatonic scale, because now you're calling it the natural minor scale, which has the implication that it's different than the major scale, or it's, you know, it's one of many, many scales or something like that, when in reality I'm constantly trying to get the point across. You have the pentatonic scale and the diatonic scale. You just have that. That's it, man. That's it. So yeah, you can call it the natural minor scale, and that's cool, but that's slightly more complicated wording. You can then even complicate your wording even more if you want to be a major nerd about it and say, oh, well, I'm using the A Aeolian scale over the A minor chord, and then I'm using the G Mixolydian scale over the G major chord, and then I'm using the F Lydian scale over the F major chord. Again, we're talking about the same thing. The diatonic scale is being used all the time, the entire time. It's just different ways of saying the exact same thing. So the simplest way to express this stuff is, oh, you're in that key? Okay, I'm going to play the pentatonic scale, and it's going to sound rockin'. Oh, okay, I'm going to add those extra 2 notes in. Cool, now it sounds a bit more melodic. Done. The pentatonic scale, it's there's a whole bunch of uses for it, you know? Very, very important to learn it by itself, separately from the diatonic scale. Even though learning the diatonic scale technically covers this portion of it, you want to really have a solid grasp of this portion of it. It's just like on a piano, you want to learn your left hand, you want to learn your right hand, put it all together, you have your left and your right hand playing together, study each one, study them together. That's that. Anyway, hope this made sense. See you guys in the next video.